careful of those island boys. Little girl, use your head. They will tear you up like a paper toy. Oh, no, no, no. Yeah, 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 yeah. Oh, no, no, no.
Hi, I'm Amanda.
And I'm Rumbi.
Welcome to It's Layered.
We're in a long-distance friendship that started over 20 years ago when we were in high school.
We'll be talking about all things life, love, family, anything and everything else under the sun.
Delve deeper with us because in life, you know, Gine, my layers.
Oh, no, no, no. Yeah, 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 yeah. Oh, no, no.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to a brand new episode of It's Layered, Season 5.
Are we on Season 5?
I don't know. Somehow we blinked and we're here. We have a very special guest in the building, someone we both got to meet last year when we were in Zim for Mairora, and an incredible member of the Zimbabwean fashion community. We're talking about Danai Madondo. She is a fashion designer, textile artist, storyteller who is based in Harare. Her work uses multidisciplinary approaches, and it takes a storytelling approach to sharing our culture and our history. And she has a strong focus on preserving cultural design practices, as well as using, I guess you would call them sustainable methods towards creating bomb-ass, you know.
Say that again, Rumbi.
Bomb-ass. I mean, I'm representing. If you're watching the video, I'm actually wearing.
Yes. Oh my God. To die for.
For Mairora, like she uses such incredible, you know, style and tactics and methods, and while being sustainable, and just, you know, she pays attention to detail. We're talking to Danai Madondo today. Welcome to the podcast, Danai.
Hi guys,
Yes.
Thank you so much for having me. That introduction was like, is that really me?
That's why we gotta say it back
Sis,
to you.
Give you your flowers.
Yeah.
Give you your
Oh,
flowers.
so good.
Yeah.
But thank you for such an amazing intro. I'm actually truly humbled, and
No.
yeah, the hype is like amazing, and yeah, wow, thank you guys for having me.
Oh, we're so
Yeah.
glad you could be here.
Yeah, we're so happy to have you. And obviously, we're going to go into all things House of Stone and all things having a business, which is, we like to delve on this podcast and just ask those
Yeah.
questions, I guess, you don't normally get a chance to ask in a regular conversation, and get to know you and get to know House of Stone. I mean, when did you decide that you were not doing the typical 9-to-5 job and you're setting up a business instead? Because, you know, them parents be like, a doctor.
I know. Yeah. You know what? It's almost like I feel like I actually didn't even choose to say I don't want a 9-to-5. I always feel like the entrepreneurship life chose me. Like often when people ask me questions and like, how did you get into sustainability? How did you get into design? And sometimes I genuinely feel like this stuff chose me. So for example, like when I started designing, it's because I couldn't get a job in SA. So I wanted to come home and create almost like a portfolio. But for some odd reason, I was like, let me start with my brand called House of Stone. I was literally like, let me start this brand, which I can sort of create a portfolio underneath. And before I knew it was a whole business. And I was like, oh, I didn't expect that. You know, the response was not what I expected. I hadn't really planned out a proper business plan. So I found myself a bit overwhelmed and just like burnt out at some point, because it's almost like the business itself was running me and I wasn't running the business, because I hadn't actually created a business plan or a proper vision for what I wanted to create around this whole concept called House of Stone.
Yeah.
I set it up more as a platform for me to develop a portfolio so that I could actually go back to SA and apply for a job.
Wow.
So I was very much that 9-to-5 person. But then it's like when I started and the response was so electric, I was like, oh gosh, okay, so I could actually be a fashion business owner. Let's do this.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's incredible, especially when you talk about how the business was running you at some point, like, you know, and kind of following, like running after and trying to catch up, I guess, with
literally.
Yeah, that's amazing though. That would you say that you've managed to kind of figure out how to run it now as opposed to it running you, if that makes sense?
I think I have a better understanding of how to run it now, but I'm still on this learning journey because I feel like you go to institutions internationally, you learn the protocols, the 1, 2, 3s of how things are supposed to work in a functioning society. Then you try and come back to Zimbabwe and apply those exact same methodologies, but Zimbabwe is its own ecosystem. Like we actually need like a thesis on the economy of Zim and how it works. It's its own little creature.
Yeah.
So for me, I've had to actually kind of like step back, erase everything that I thought I knew about the fashion business, especially from a global perspective, and understand how does Zimbabwe function. And in understanding how Zimbabwe functions, how can I take that knowledge and then create a brand that I can still export to the world? So it's almost like, I always feel like having a business in Zim is like Game of Thrones. It's like a chessboard and you're trying to figure out which way to move the pieces. Tomorrow you might find out that there's an inflation rate that's just skyrocketed up, or suddenly people don't want to spend their money. So there's so many things that you sort of cannot always predict. But I think because I've sort of gotten used to this environment, I always have like 3, 4, 5 backup plans.
Kudos to you on that.
Yeah, kudos.
Like, if this happens, how are you going to respond? If that happens, how will you respond? I try to create as many scenarios as I possibly can. And yeah, we'll see how it works out this year. But I feel like in Zim, you just need to take the plunge.
Yeah.
And you figure it out as you go. You can prepare yourself as much as you possibly can. But as I mentioned, Zim is its own little creature.
Yeah.
And you're just like living in its world.
Absolutely. And, you know, talking about how, you know, you kind of found yourself in this industry as an entrepreneur, essentially, how did those close to you respond to your decision, like your family, you know, close friends and things like that? How was that decision?
Well, luckily for me, I'm not the firstborn. I always like to give credit to my elder sister who chose the straight and narrow road of becoming a dentist. My brother studied economics, but he ended up going into art eventually. So I almost feel like they sacrificed their lives so that I could live my best life.
They ran so you could walk.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I could, you know, do the thing. So by the time I was telling my parents I want to go study fashion, my mom was all for it because my mom comes from an extremely creative family.
Nice.
And she always likes to say how I remind her of her mother, who was also a maker. She was always just like knitting, making stuff. And then my dad was on that whole tip of, you want to sew curtains. I was like, I don't know how fashion and curtains
has gone into curtains. Oh my God.
But the funniest thing about it is that my graduation collection was actually made out of tapestry that is usually used for curtaining. And I said, who's the joke on? But yeah, it was interesting. And I think eventually he got into it and he actually ended up becoming my biggest hype master. He'd be like, yeah, you're going to become the Gucci of Zimbabwe, the Chanel of Zimbabwe. And I'm just like, amen, I receive.
Yeah,
it's so great. Sweet when our parents like try picture it, like, but then they go too far, like Gucci, and they're like, no, but that's not even the vibe of mine. But anyway,
wrong. Like, you know what? I will take any positivity at this point as long
at least
as
you know what Gucci is, child. At least you know what Gucci is.
Exactly. That's exactly what I was thinking. I was like, oh, you know what that is? Wow. Good on you.
I mean, a lot of our listeners like to know things and maybe they have wishes on their hearts as well. So we're going to just take it back. As much as you like went into the deep end starting your business, how do you think you garnered the support to start your business, even emotionally, financially, physically? I mean, did you have to have the right connections in Zimbabwe?
So when I came back from SA, I had my little car. I don't even know if I want to say the figure, but I'll say the figure because it's so embarrassing to me right now. But I had 20,000 Rand saved to start my little business. And I really thought it was a lot. And all it could get me was a secondhand industrial machine. And maybe the first rolls of fabric that I purchased. And obviously I saved that money whilst I was working in like my retail job. And I really thought it was something because I was so bad with maths and like accounting that in my mind, I was like, I've got money.
Rolling.
But then I think when you start fashion, you realize that it's so capital intensive, and that a lot of like the major brands or brands that are emerging have like a really strong backing. Sometimes you can find a person who wants to maybe buy part of your business, and they focus purely on the business side. Then you'll have someone that maybe might come in from a marketing point of view and support you. Then they pretty much just leave you to be the genius that you are creatively. And you find that the brands that have that end up going really far. But most of us independent, self-taught, self-funded, self-everything who play like 5 million roles in the one business, we sort of have to be all those people in one. So the growth ends up being a lot slower. But I think what I've noticed is I'm a person that always shoots my shots. And I think somehow that has somehow paid off. Like half the time I do it scared. Actually, everything that I've done, I've always been scared. But I feel like if you wait to feel like everything is perfect, you'll never get anything done. So half of the time I feel like, let me just do it. Let me shoot my shot. If it fails, look, I didn't have it to begin with. And who knows, they might say yes and voila. And I also think people respect the consistency that I have shown and the desire to keep going, and how sometimes when I fall down, I manage to still pick myself up. It's easy to get defeated, but I feel like sometimes people have supported me because I've supported myself over the years, and they've seen it, they've seen the consistency. And I think people ultimately end up respecting that. So even if they didn't like it, they're like, we like what you stand for.
Yeah, that's good enough.
I think they like what you stand for because they can see the consistency and me at least trying to improve.
Especially in the environment you're in. It's very like commendable to be able to continue, you know, as you mentioned. Unpredictable.
And Rumbi and I can get you about shooting your shot. I mean, even this podcast, when we started, we were like, I personally had to even look up what podcasting was like. I had to go back to the jump. But like, it's a testament of if you have something sitting on your heart, just to go for it. I think sometimes you always see ourselves at the end, like, oh yeah, I'm going to be successful. But it's like, it's a journey, and the success is the journey. It's not, it's not the destination. So it's like, shooting a shot, man, it works.
Yeah. And it's so funny that you say that, because I always feel like if shooting your shot were a country, it would be Zimbabwe.
That part.
You know what I mean? Like we know how to shoot a shot, you know?
Yeah.
For sure. And that's such a perfect segue, because Amanda and I on this podcast, we celebrate Zimbabwean creatives and minds and just everything, or a lot of things Zimbabwe. How excited are you for the creative industry coming out of Zimbabwe? Because I feel we are I just feel like we're incredibly creative and have a lot to offer. It's just perhaps we haven't always been given the platform, or it hasn't been as respected by our own people in terms of, our creative genius or prowess, if you would call it that. So have you found it easy or hard to stay motivated? You've already alluded to the difficulties of running a business, but how do you keep thriving and pushing forward? And are you excited for what's coming out of the country?
I am actually. Like, I won't lie, there was many seasons that I've had where I felt demotivated, and I've had to like find the strength somehow to motivate myself. But simultaneously, when you see what creatives are managing to accomplish with very little support and just using their creativity, their resourcefulness, it almost gives me the energy to be like, yes, let's get this going. And I feel like this year, and maybe beyond this year, my mantra has been Zimbabwe to the world. And I keep telling people that I feel like when the world finally looks at Zimbabwe, it won't really be through our mining per se, but it will actually be through the arts. I feel like our narrative somehow is similar to that of the Nigerian economy, where Nigerians at some point were looked down upon, nobody wanted them around, but now they're really dominating within the creative spaces. And I feel like when I look at them as a reference, our story is somewhat similar in that Zimbabweans are always the last people to be thought of. But I'm starting to see that the way we are just pushing, coming together, collaborating, and just making it happen with whatever we've got, because we are now understanding, or at least shall I say, we're now valuing our own voices and our own stories. And we're like, look, we're going to put it out there, even if it's 2 cents that we've got. What can we do with this 2 cents? So I'm excited because I really feel like it's our time. There's just something stirring energy-wise within the creative space. I love how a lot of our diasporan celebs, if I can call them that, are coming back to Zim and connecting even with the local creatives. And we're just finding ways to synergize and just tell our stories and share our art, ultimately.
You know, it's obviously we've been following along with all the things that you and House of Stone are doing. I mean, recently you were in London, am I correct?
That is correct.
In what ways, when you're in those spaces, do you distinctly think Zimbabwe is being represented or making its mark creatively?
You know, that's quite a challenging question to answer, because I feel like we're still trying to figure out who we are and what we want to say, because even in terms of our history, even if it's from a form of language or dress, a lot of it has sort of been lost. So we're in a space of really trying to reclaim it, redefine it. And I think our aesthetic right now is actually very fluid. It's very much informed by international global trends and trying to find ways in which we can incorporate our traditional cultural nuances into that. So I think for now, I think people are more interested in what do we have to say story-wise more than the actual, let's say, product. So I feel like when Zimbabweans go into these spaces, they want to hear our story more than anything else. And even when I ask people in those spaces, like, what was it about House of Stone? It's actually never the clothing. It's always the stories. It's always the power behind the visuals and the storytelling that has opened doors for me to be in those spaces, because people are very curious to hear, what do Zimbabweans think about themselves? Because we don't know, like, the world doesn't know, and they want to know, they're curious. And I think everyone's looking towards, the whole world is looking towards Africa to state their position. So when I go into those spaces, I think that's what I try to do, is speak from my perspective, my experience, but I'm only just one voice. We need many more voices to show how dynamic we are as a people, even our different experiences, the different ways in which we have grown up. We're so diverse, even in those few things. So just to be able to share that, I try to just contribute what I can from my own experience and interests.
Yeah, that's really dope. And I think something you mentioned earlier was collaboration, like collaborating with each other. Someone we've had on our podcast, a friend of yours in the creative space, Gemma Griffiths. We've had such an incredible conversation with her, and she's obviously worn your pieces many times. How do you feel like we're doing as Zimbabweans collaboratively? Because I think sometimes as a people, we have a bit of talking about, how do we see ourselves? I think sometimes we want, as long as my things are firing, I don't care about anyone else, like, a bit of that selfish mentality. But how do you see collaboration working to help build the creative industry?
Okay, before I even answer that question, I'd say that culture or that characteristic that we have as, if my things are firing, then we don't worry about anyone else. I think it comes from our upbringing and our culture here, our high school culture, where everything is so competitive and it's almost like each man for himself. But I think as you mature and you become an adult and you work a little bit, you end up realizing that, you can have a moment. You know what I mean? You can actually have several moments, but life is a season. And for true sustainability, it needs to benefit more than just yourself. And even right now, from a fashion perspective, I don't even think we have a fashion culture or system in Zimbabwe. It's not there, it's not present, it doesn't exist. So how can you be so worried about yourself in a space where the actual system doesn't exist? You need to work with others in order to build it. That's the only way that there's anything worth fighting over or squabbling over. It's like being a big fish in a bowl and there's a whole ocean, and it's like, but you're in a bowl. So I just feel like we need to get out of that mindset and realize that we first need to build our industry, that the only way we can build it is by working together, by collaborating. And then once we've built something, then there's actually something tangible to actually compete over. But until then, what are we actually competing over? Sense? That doesn't make sense to me.
Say that again. That's the sense.
Don't make sense. Don't make Yeah. So I feel like that's my attitude towards it, to be honest.
Yeah, that is very frank, actually, because I think people would still be fighting and you're thinking, guys. And I think Gemma's ethos was that as well, that we need to collaborate and to do things together. So it's lovely to see you guys, I suppose, champion that, because I guess people look up to you guys, obviously being in the creative space. And I feel like it just will filter through to us as a people as well.
Yeah.
Well, that's my hope anyway.
Me too,
On a
me
personal level, though, how do you balance your personal life and business? Obviously, being a mom, a wife.
Girl, it's a hot mess. It's a hot mess right now. But you know what? I feel like whenever you start something new, you never really know what it's going to be like or what the response is. So whilst you're in it, it always starts off looking a bit messy, but you clean it up. You clean it up as much as you possibly can. And I think one thing I've come to sort of like, maybe not accept, but sort of like consider is that maybe the concept of balance is never really gonna be there.
Yeah.
You just do the best you can with what you've got, and you try and show up, and you try and prioritize the things that matter the most. And I think as long as you're prioritizing the things that matter the most, then that, I suppose, becomes your balance. So in terms of prioritizing, I could do better, definitely. I think I still have a way to go with that, but I'm also just not beating myself up about being imperfect right now. Like, I feel like I've lived a long enough life of beating myself up for not having it all together that I wasn't able to enjoy life. So I think today I can genuinely say, yeah, my it's just a bit of a mess, but I'm good.
Yeah, I'm happy. You know what? I
Yeah.
totally understand. I totally relate to that, because I think we have also grown up with this level of perfectionism, especially with women, especially with mothers. We thought we saw our mothers do it. So, but meanwhile, they're probably also thinking, child, I didn't do half the things I was meant to do.
Yeah.
But like, we saw that and we emulate that and we think that's what we ought to do. But really, as long as the child is fed, you're going to sleep, it's all good. Like,
You healthy?
As long as they don't turn
You
into
healthy?
like a crazy person, you know.
You've done your job. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's so dope.
But how do you balance the travel though in amongst that? Because obviously you've just been away for business.
Well, you know what? I'm so blessed to have a very supportive husband, to be honest. And I think a lot of the time we often underrate the person that you choose to have in your life. Because I feel like that also differentiates how successful you'll be in your pursuits. I always say, if you are a woman that is really like gung-ho and really determined, has lots of things she wants to accomplish in her life and kind of play all these multiple roles, you need to definitely have a supportive husband if you're married. And even like a supportive family that really just shows up and says, how can we pitch in to help where we can? And I think I've been blessed to have that, and I don't take it for granted. Well, I hope I don't.
That's really beautiful.
Yeah, because I wouldn't be able to do the things that I do today if people were fighting me every single time or saying, no, you can't do this. You're a mother, you have to stay at home, you can't go there. Hey, what? You know, like the stereotypical sort of raps. So I'm lucky that's not my story.
So, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about influence, whether creatively or just your approach to business. You and I, fun fact, we grew up a few years together living in Ghana, West Africa.
Literally the best time of my life.
Absolutely.
Ruby said that about her life.
Yeah, it really just opened me up. Yeah, it was so great. And our families got to know each other while there. And I know for me personally, the influence of Ghanaian culture, just the pride they took in their culture, their art, their clothing, their food, who they were as a people, and how proud they were. And I remember, I think that has left a lifetime impression on me, on just how I perceive myself and, you know, the continent, and how proud I have become of where I come from. So I'm curious to know about your time, how that influenced you, and how the rest of the continents influenced you, if at all. If you can talk a bit about that.
I would say actually Ghana influenced me in my character more than anything. And what I've come to realize is that if I was to define Ghanaian people, they're very warm, welcoming, happy people. And I think they're considerate. And I think I sort of took that, put it back to them. So that's why sometimes, like, as much as I love my people, there's certain characteristics or attributes that we could work on improving. And I think it's those attributes that I just mentioned, where it's like, I'm very open, I'm very welcoming. I see people for who they are upon meeting them. I don't rank people according to their background or what school they went to. And I think that's a very Ghanaian thing. I felt like Ghanaians are just like happy, open people. They didn't really care too much where you came from. We were like, we're all humans. Yeah, I feel like that's what I took away from them in terms of my character as a person, how it influences my work. Wow. I think there was a time there was a major influence on my work, but I tend to like to give myself time to study my work and actually look at it and see like these little things that I've subconsciously been taking in, because we're all sponges, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes it's easier to pick up the things that you've been inspired by, and then there are other nuances, subtle ones that you might not be able to pick up on. But I have a feeling there's definitely something there beyond just the character influence.
I think even entrepreneurship, because especially when we lived there, Ghana was very much, there was a lot of that hustle, like just make things work culture. There were a lot of market. That was the life, you know. And I remember going back to Zim, and everything was very kind of clinical and like managed. Like you go here to do this, you go here, you know. This was early, mid to late 90s. That's when I went back, before things, you know, changed.
Yes, we know the story.
So, but yeah, I think, you know, even your mentality around entrepreneurship could, you know, maybe subliminally, because I remember being like, wow, this is different. When I was there, I was like, this is so different to what I knew compared to home. So yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah, you've actually given me something to go and like reflect on. But I definitely feel like I'm a sponge, and I'm always soaking up something, like garnering inspiration from somewhere. And sometimes that's why I feel like my aesthetics sometimes don't traditionally or stereotypically look Zimbabwean, although we don't even know what that Zimbabwean aesthetic is as yet.
We're judging each other on an aesthetic we don't even know what it is. Like, it's just
I'll
like,
never forget going. I was in I think I was in kindergarten or elementary school. I don't remember where I was, and we had to go in our traditional clothing. And I remember like, oh, so what am I gonna wear? And then either I had a Zambia just tied around me, or I had the two-piece, isn't the Ndebele, like where you wear like a boob tube with like a grass skirt or something like that. But that's like Ndebele. Ndebele is also South African. So, you know, I don't know.
No, I actually think you did pretty good with the fusion though. Like the descriptors you're using are sort of like stereotypically considered Zimbabwean, and also like, when you talk about the borders, right? When you say it's South African, is it really South African?
Also true.
That's true.
Who are these? Like, these borders were not created by us.
That's also true.
You know, so it's like there's gonna be so many cultural things that people might share that might have crossed over. When they crossed over, we don't know. So I just feel like, it's an ongoing study of ourselves, to be honest. And it's exciting because there's just so much information that's out there, but we haven't yet tapped into it. And I think we are the generation that are curious. We are the generation that wants to know. And even when I hear about the history of fashion in Zim, I heard that a lot of it is in Portugal, and you're like, what?
Yeah, right.
You know what I mean? So there's just so much, like, our history is just so interesting and dynamic. Like, I feel like, will I be alive long enough to figure it all out?
Yeah.
But I'm more interested in just doing the work and sharing the progress and my experience.
And I do think, like, from a diaspora perspective, us leaving sometimes even makes you even more curious about where you come from? Because you're also like, people will be asking you all these questions. They're like, oh, actually, I don't know. Like, let me go look that up. And people are like looking at you like, what do you mean you don't know? You know, but you're like, hey, don't ask. You know, but it's like, yeah, it confronts you in a way where you see other people being super proud of their identity, you know, opening restaurants, opening all these things, even though they're miles from home. Then you think, okay, but where does Zimbabwe fit into this space? So I'm really grateful for creatives like you, because then when we see ourselves presented, especially internationally, it's just like, oh yeah, you know, like, you know, those are my people. Yeah.
I
know, that's exactly how I feel.
Every time I've shown people like photos of Brora and the legal wedding or whatever, everyone, when they see my outfit for Rora, they're like, oh my gosh. And I'm like, yeah, that's a Zimbabwean designer. I'll be saying. So I'm telling you, it also gives us a level of pride. And that's why it was also important for me to have that representation on, you know, such a day, because it was like, I could just wear anyone or any, you know what I mean? So
anything,
it's like, it's that. And that's how, you know, we build our confidence, I feel like, through the work of, you know, House of
creatives.
Stone,
Yeah.
Then we feel confident and proud, and like, yeah, that's us. Okay, that's us. And then that's us. Okay, so
yeah.
And you know, it's so interesting that you speak about your Aurora, because I could even tell how thoughtful you were in everything that you're trying to do with that. And I was like, man, that's deep. Like,
yeah, like some of us were just like, okay, come and bring the cows and let's call it a day.
No, like, I won't lie, I felt the pressure, but I wanted to be a part of it. You know what I mean? It's like a pressure that you sort of like, that you want, not even sort of, but it's a pressure that you want. And it's like, wow, you know what? The meaning, the thoughtfulness that has gone behind this. I want to be a part of it.
And you delivered.
The pride element is so great.
Where do you see your business headed? Like, what is success, especially what is success to you for House of Stone?
You know, guys, can I be honest? I want to be referenced in lecture theaters.
Yeah.
Like, when people are studying fashion, I want to be a reference where people are like, in 2018 to whatever, these were the fashion aesthetics in Zimbabwe, and I am a reference point, I'm a study point. That is what I'm working towards, because I feel like now I'm struggling to find Zimbabwean designers to reference. Why? Let's not act like they weren't there.
So you want a moment in time where it's
and I want Zimbabweans to be able to see their own doing something the same way other countries and nations have their own that they reference, and they'll be like, oh, look at Margiela from the 19 whatevers or 1800s.
From the archives, you know
what I mean? Like, we need our own archives. Why reference foreign designers? Why not reference our own? And to be honest, as a designer today, I desire that. I desire to be like, oh, who are the designers I can reference? But they aren't there. But luckily, we have a culture that we can still reference and look back to and be like, okay, fine, I'll take from the culture, from the broad cultural spectrum that exists, and be influenced by that. So I think it's important for us to have our own people to reference, whether it's in fashion, whether it's in music, whether it's in film, to be able to study our own films in lecture theaters and be like, okay, Joe Django in year 2020, this is what they created. This was the narrative behind it. Why were these sort of stories being told this year? What was the influence, and how can we reinterpret it for, 2080 or something? So I feel like that's so important to have your own people to be able to reference, even from lecture material. Like, half of the time when people write on Zimbabwe or on our politics, it's a foreigner writing about us. No, excuse me. No.
Yeah. And were you there?
How do I know you're even telling the truth? And even with research and references, one thing I've learned about Zimbabweans is that when they get interviewed about a certain topic by a foreigner, they pander to the interviewer. So they say what they think the interviewer wants to hear, rather than saying what it is. So there's a huge difference of, if I go into a rural community and I want to ask, what's the life on the ground? That kind of camaraderie, brother-sister conversation will be so different than from what they will have with a foreigner. And you'll find if you were to put the two documentation together, be like, wow, that was vastly different.
Definitely. True. Oh my gosh, so true. And we are a prideful people. So we'll present a certain image to you, because we'll be like, I ain't telling you my house is burning right now.
No, we're not gonna.
No.
Or if you want to tell me that my struggle is this, because I know that's what you want me to say. Have you ever had like those interviews when someone interviews you, asks you a question with an answer, and it's like,
Yeah.
so why did you ask me?
Yeah. This one for me.
If
like,
you want the answer.
Or when
that's
they
the-
literally want to hear you talk about struggle and you're like, oh no, I didn't grow up like that. Was not
I
my
didn't grow up
story.
like that.
And then they look at you like, no, but like you're Zimbabwe, you're African, you gotta have the struggle. And I'm like, I mean, yes, but not like that struggle, you know.
Yeah,
it's
exactly. I
different.
see that a lot with travel. Like
All
when
the
we tell
time.
them, I mean, even you guys talking about growing up in Ghana for a part of your childhoods, or saying, oh, we used to travel a lot when we were
Yes.
kids, you know, as Zimbabwe was working. Like,
Mm.
you know, it's like one of those things. People be like, no, we don't want to hear that story. Like,
Tell
we want
us
to
about
tell us about. You're like, okay, all
Yeah.
these stories are valid, including mine.
Yeah.
You know, so it's,
Yes,
Absolutely.
exactly.
And you know what? You talk about being referenced by other designers in the future, which is so beautiful. And I think even as a customer, like who wants to, you know, we had the whole movement of Buy Black after 2020, the riots in the US. And legitimately, I think sometimes when I'm like, oh, I need something new. And I'm like, okay, African designers. And it's all, you know, someone from UK based, American based, typically Nigerian, maybe Ghanaian, maybe some one or two other nationalities. And even as like other fellow Zimbabweans, it's hard because you can't even be like, hey, so I bought a cozy from, you know, this, and like, I'm telling you, I want a hot girl summer in a Zimbabwean fit. I'm telling you.
I got you. I think got a little number or something.
Yeah, you know, but like, do you get what I mean? It's like even just from that level of like you're kind of like thrown, like, where do I go, or like what do I choose? And that's why I think fast fashion continues to thrive, because we're just like, you know what, this is easier to access or to find.
True.
As we prepare to wrap up, I wanted to ask you what your ideal client would be. Like, who is someone who, because you also do, you know, you make to order a lot of your clothes. I remember I felt like I was auditioning. I was like, who? I hope she
accepts me.
I hope she accepts.
You
know?
are so funny.
Like, you know what I mean? So what's your ideal client?
You know, I usually have like a broad descriptor, and I always say it's the conscious wanderer. But what I mean by that is someone that is open to learning, someone that cares and is intentional about what they wear. They care about the materials, they care about the stories as much as the actual final product. And they are, in a sense, exposed. They want to see the world. They want to see what the world has to offer, whether it's just like even your own space. Let's say if you can't afford to travel to the States, at least be curious about where you come from. At least try and figure out like what's happening in your space. So that's why I always say the curious wanderer, someone that is curious, wants to learn, wants to grow, wants to be exposed, and wants to live an intentional life as much as they possibly can. It's not an easy thing to do because sometimes life is happening, but I feel like when you put intention into things, you get a better result out of it. And ultimately, it's a win-win for everyone involved.
I can't even.
Yeah, just preaching to us right now, Danai. We're just like,
That's such a
okay.
Bars.
Any upcoming projects that we should look forward to? Obviously, you can share with our listeners anything happening for your store. I know you also got a store in Helensvale. You know, can we just, because some people might have been like, House of Stone, what's this? I've never heard of this. Where can they find you? Just share all about yourself with us, please.
House of Stone, the name, am I correct to say comes from Zimbabwe, which comes from Zimbabwe Mabwe, which is literally House of Stone.
We get it.
But with a twist, because she spells it H-A-U-S. Okay?
Yes.
For those listening.
Yes.
Yes.
She's like, you guys are speaking my language.
Just like, But no, like in terms of like things that are happening, so much. With the showroom, actually, the angle that I took was really different. I guess people would call it a store because there's things that they can go in and buy. But the reason I called it a showroom was it was more of like a display space where people could come in and see the pieces that I have available, order them, and I can make them. And if they like it, what's in store and they fit it, then they can buy it off the rail. But then I also incorporated other creatives, other Zimbabwean, female Zimbabwean creatives. And you know, the funny thing about it is when I invited all these other amazing Zimbabwean creatives to be a part of it, I was like, hey, we can have a one-stop shop experience, whereas maybe someone comes to see me, then they can see Boheka or see Patch Mawoko and discover other brands, and we can sort of cross market. But the thing that I later discovered was all my suppliers were female. And I was like, that was not intentional, but I felt like I always believe in the spirit and the mood of the times, right? And for me, I felt like that was telling me that it's the time of the she. Women need to come together. Women creatives are doing things, amazing things, and we can work together. This stanky narrative that we can't work together, it's a lie from the pits of hell.
Yes! Say it again.
It's a lie, right? You know, I feel like that narrative has sort of like been, people keep saying that narrative, sort of try and convince us women that we don't like each other, that we can't work together. And it's almost like trying to saturate it into our soul so that we believe that lie, and it's not true. Because the truth is, when women do work together and we finally find a level ground where we're sisters, whatever we are, right? The things that we manage to accomplish exceed us as individuals. So I said this lie, this trap from the pits of hell. Get me behind me. That energy.
Behind
we
me.
Rebuke it. We rebuke it.
No.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
And your handles on social media, you know, she has a website. We're gonna link everything in the show notes and you know on the description. But please share with us where we can find you. For those who are not in Zim, who can't go to the showroom, as you know, she's got a website and you can work collaboratively with Danai virtually, which was she takes a very, let me just say, it's very serious business. Like she customizes.
Please don't come and play with our sister's time.
No.
Like,
she personalizes it. She asks you what you were thinking, and if you have any references, then she goes through some of her work and says, is there anything here that, like, I don't want to kill her, you know, the process, but she
people are gonna be like, Rumbi, I'm not getting this experience.
It's not the same. No, it was
you
really
know what? I feel like I should bring out the
pressure
now.
The pressure is getting worse.
No, you know what? It's good pressure, because now, like, I can't let my girl down. Like,
you can't.
You can't let me down. No. So please let us know how we can find you, or where we can reach you, and where your showroom is for those in Zoom.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Well, you can find me on social media across every platform as House of Stone, spelled Haus of Stone. And in Zim, you can find me at Helensvale Shopping Center inside the Emma Gumeni Culture Center. And that place is about to be a whole vibe culturally. So you guys have to come through, because December, if you guys are coming back from the diaspora, yes, that's the
We've
place.
heard about Emma Gumeni. I have heard about it.
Hey, guys, whatever you heard about your race, that is about to be lit.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much, Danai. Amanda, I don't know if there's anything else you want to add, but this was just soul enriching. This is why we wanted you on the podcast. We stand people like Danai who are truly change makers in the creative industry and repping Zim so hard. Like, I can't even keep up with what she be doing. She has done.
Yeah.
It'd be a lot. So much respect. And as always, thank you for being here. Thank you to our listeners for tuning in and spending your time with us. We are on all the social platforms. We're gonna link them in the description. And we look forward to seeing you on our next episode. Bye, everybody.
Bye, guys.
Bye.